And these are close friends who wanted to come along. For that, I want to thank them very much. Of course, my wife, who I'll talk about a little bit later. So getting back to the history, the reason that I remember that date, and I don't remember dates very well, is June 28th is my anniversary, our anniversary. It was an interesting call. And I was working in the middle of the day. And I just went about my business. I knew nothing about the disease, zero. So of course I immediately went online. And the information that you get online, of course, is old. It's inaccurate. But it wasn't good. And it's still not good today. The only cure, ultimately, was a transplant. There were a few things that they were working on. Nothing showed any real promise. So I, of course, set about trying to find out what could be done. I went to the Mayo Clinic. We tried a couple of different trials. None of them worked. And so this started in 2002. For the first 2 years, things seemed to be just going along okay. I got checked regularly. The numbers were fairly stable when I was working on them. But about 2 years later, in 2004, my blood counts began to drop. And I started getting transfusions of red blood cells and then ultimately red blood cells and platelets. So I would work a normal schedule, and every other week, every third week, I would go for 2 units of blood, 2 units of platelets, 2 bags of platelets, they're called. And that would keep me going for another couple of weeks. But things were progressing. And so ultimately, we started making plans for a transplant. The transplant was done in December 2005 at Hackensack University Medical Center in New Jersey. Ben was my donor. Couldn't meet each other for 2 years. And for 2 years, or for the first year and a half, things seemed to be going along pretty well. But then it began to fail. The graft, the donation is called the graft. The graft was working, but somehow was failing, and as it turned out, it was turning into leukemia. So we made plans for a second transplant. Not that uncommon. From a different donor. And 2 years later, to the month, 2007, I had a second transplant. I have a brief video I'll show later. My second donor is in Minneapolis, and he made a short video, which is good. Just so you know, in the first transplant, I spent 3 months in the hospital recovering. My wife came, it was about a half an hour from our house. She came every day. Stayed almost full time. My kids, I have two daughters. When I was diagnosed in 2002, and no grandchildren, I have 7. We have 7. Didn't think I'd live to see that yet. We have 7. There were a couple of things. I mean, the recovery other than being in the hospital was fairly uneventful. I did have hair at one time. I actually grew back after the first, you do lose your hair, and it grew back after the first transplant. I had the second transplant 2 years later. It went actually a lot more smoothly. I was only in the hospital a month. But I never got the hair back, which is a very small price to pay. In fact, I'm kind of happy. Jay Feinberg is an interesting story. About 20 plus years ago, when did he was 20, 25 years? 20 years ago. Jay happens to be from West Orange, Ben's hometown. Couldn't find a donor. We did a donor drive. My wife and I went to another temple where they had the drive. And in those days, when you registered as a donor, they had to draw blood. It was not a cheek swab. We registered. A lot of other people registered and found a donor for me. Out of these donor drives. Some people ask, does it work? It sure does. In our town, recently, the last 2 years, there was a woman that needed a donor. Couldn't find one. They did a donor drive, and they found the donor from that drive, specifically. Relatively small drive. The woman was Italian. We found a donor for her, and she is doing fine. So people sometimes ask, they ask me, does it work? It sure does. Unfortunately, during the time that I was undergoing this, I became friendly with 3 other people, all undergoing various forms of treatments and ultimately stem cell transplants for other conditions. None of them survived. I'm still in touch with the people at the Mayo Clinic. One doctor in particular calls me a couple of times a year to see how I'm doing. Spoke to him recently, right before I left. He just happened to call me. And he told me something I didn't know. That he had not recommended a transplant. And he's a transplanter. But he didn't recommend it for me, and he never told me why. He simply said that if I was his brother, he wouldn't recommend it. But he told me, when I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, that based on some genetic testing, that I had virtually no chance of surviving. But I had no option. I was dying. What was I going to do? So I did the transplants. I wanted to go skiing with my grandchildren. We went to Deer Valley. We've been skiing now with them. How many years? 8 years? No, not 6 years. My oldest granddaughter is 11. The darkness will come soon. Today I climbed the side. Couldn't climb the stairs in my abs. When I met Ben for the first time, we had communicated for a couple of years. He was in Israel, I was in the States. He was there once at home, and I was in the Hamptons. We talked, but then he came home for his brother's wedding, and we made sure to meet. We met at his parents' house. We were conversing, and he said, you know, February we're going to have an awareness month to raise awareness for stem cell donors. And I said, well, you know, our temple's planning a trip to Israel in February. Maybe we'll go. I hadn't really given it serious consideration. We have other trips planned, and it kind of would be squeezed in, and we're traveling a lot, and we don't have a practice to run. We talked about it, and we said we better go. I hadn't been to Israel in years. I've been here a half a dozen times, but I hadn't been here in maybe 20 years. So we decided we should go. And that's why I'm here. The main reason is a part of him goes with me everywhere I go. A part of Bruce, my other donor, we joke about it. Bruce and I have met many times. My wife gave me a 70th birthday last year, and Ben did a YouTube because he couldn't be there. We showed the YouTube, and I'm going to show a little video of it, 2 minutes, that Bruce did. And we joke all the time about, because we travel a lot, it's one of the things that we want to do. We always joke about where where the stem cells are going. And, you know, it's true because my whole, you know, blood system really isn't mine anymore. I'm 100% donor. There's something called a chimerism, which is a test. Does everybody know what a chimera is, or chimera? It's pronounced differently. It was a Greek animal that had one body with two heads that faced opposite directions. And they do a test to determine what percentage of your bone marrow and your circulating blood are what is called donor and what's called host. You're the host and the donor is the donor. Ideally, you want 100% chimerism. You want to change to your donor. Now, I'm 100% donor now. Fortunately, I'm no longer any man. That'll make a bit of difference. Because without him, there was no second transplant. I was scheduled for a third transplant. Second transplant was failing. My daughter works for a company that does, I'll tell you a little bit about it in a minute. She's always been involved in oncology. At one time, she was global director of oncology for Pfizer. She left Pfizer and she's working now for a startup company out of the Hutchinson in Seattle. They run it at Hackensack. They do a procedure called a donor lymphocyte infusion, or known as a DLI. It's additional cells from the donor, but they're white blood cells now. These are not stem cells, but they do have to get another donation from the donor. And they infuse these over a period of, depending on how many cells they can get over a period of time, in hopes of kickstarting the graft. Because they knew the graft had engrafted. I had lost the graft, but it just didn't have the potency to overcome the disease. A very virulent disease, very hard to get rid of. So we did it. We did 5 of these, 5 infusions every 6 weeks, 1 every 6 weeks. He was sick for a day. It wasn't bad. The procedure wasn't bad at all. Made you a little nauseous for a day. Went home, went to sleep, and that was the end of it. But it wasn't working. I was still getting transfused, platelets. We had found a third donor. I was about 2 weeks away from the third transplant. I don't even know if human. Okay. And then the numbers started to stabilize. And then within 2 weeks, they were skyrocketing. I owe this to my daughter. For those of you who don't know, in Hamburg, Germany, there's a Jewish hospital. The doctor who does these DLIs has done 16 of them in myelofibrosis patients. Every one of them was successful. They've never done one in the United States. My daughter, through friends, when she was living in Europe and working for J&J, knew somebody who knew somebody. They got in touch with this doctor, the Jewish hospital in Hamburg. And he basically said, yes, you can do it. They were not going to do it at Hackensack because they just didn't know. They use it for leukemia. Very successful in ALL, which is a very fast-moving leukemia. But they decided to try it because they didn't think there was a downside, but it wasn't working. What they didn't know is that you can't do it every 6 weeks. You've got to give it months in between each one. For some reason, they just didn't get the communication right. Unfortunately, it took a few months to set up for the third donation and the third transplant, and it started to work. So I never had the third one. My hemoglobin runs around 16 and a half. And it's 6 years now, a little over 6 years since the second transplant. I take no medication. I take a few supplements, multivitamin, nothing special. No medications, I'm on no restrictions. I do everything that anybody else does. I'm going to get up in the morning.
I have only two kinds of days, and I tell my wife this all the time. I have good days and better days. You don't know what the good you do. You have no idea. You may think you do, but you don't. And I thank you all. Keep up the good work. You really don't know the lives you touch. Some people will never know. I hope you never do. I hope that there's no need. But I do want to tell you one thing. I just want to show this quick video. My daughter sent me something. If I can find it. I don't know. I just want to tell you some of the things that are real cutting edge and what stem cells can be used for, why it's so important to increase the number of donors. Stem cell bone marrow have been really more or less used for blood-related disorders, any kind of blood-related disorders, leukemias, multiple myelomas, any of these things that are largely blood-related, they seem to work the best. In the past, years ago, most of the testing was allele testing for 6. We would test for 6 alleles, and if you had a 6 out of 6 match, it was perfect. Now it's 10 out of 10. So the more you can do it, the better. There's now additional testing for something called the KIR gene, where you want a mismatch. But the key is now immune profiling and immune sequencing. So that if you have somebody who's a good match, 9, 9.5, or 10 out of 10, and you have a good immune profile match, you can predict now with up to 90% certainty whether the transplant's going to work. So that's one thing. It's also being used for a lot of other diseases. Multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease. There's a couple of others to name a few. The need for stem cell donors is going to increase because they're going to be used for treating many more diseases in the future. So that the need for drives, the need to increase awareness to get more people to swab their cheeks. The age is going up that people are eligible. You can give, if you're healthy enough, virtually at any age now. You can give to a related donor. There's virtually, if you're healthy enough to donate, there's no age limit. And to an unrelated donor, you can give now to age 70, and they'll make exceptions if they can't find another donor. So there's really no reason that, that these drives have to be limited to young people. It used to be, wow, I'm too old. Well, that's not the criteria. There's other criteria that might eliminate people as being donors, but age isn't one of them. So I just think it's important to encourage people to keep up what you're doing. If anybody has any questions about it, I'd be more than happy to answer. But I just wanted to just run this real quick.
Minneapolis, Minnesota, a very cold place in wintertime. My name is Bruce Cantor. I'm a pediatrician here in the Twin Cities. My wife Susan and I have 2 wonderful sons, Benjamin, who's 11, and Isaac, who is 9. And my story of being a bone marrow donor started back about 25 years ago when I was in medical school. And I became a bone marrow drive, and I was part of that. And I swabbed my cheeks, simple to do, sent it off, didn't think anything more about it. And in 2005, I was contacted via bone marrow donor. Actually, from which I didn't know at the time. And actually, they chose a different donor who was a perfect match as well. 2 years later, I got called again about being a bone marrow donor, and this time I gave my donation. It was simple, it's easy. I just went to the local blood center where they just took blood out and took off the cells.
I just have to, unfortunately, he emailed this to me, and it's in 2 parts.
As part of a pediatrician, that's what I do on a daily basis. Is I try to help kids stay healthy. Kids who are sick, I try to make them healthy as well. And so in 2010, my Mike called me and said I was his bone marrow donor. It was a wonderful experience. The last 4 years, we've had a chance to be together, both here in Minneapolis as well as New York City. I talked to Mike on the phone several times. We email back and forth. We send pictures. It's as if we become families together. So the experience with bone marrow donors has been a wonderful experience for us. In addition, it's allowed my kids and some of my families who I work with to realize that just to donate, to just give to another human being, no matter what the outcome is a wonderful experience. Something that is lifelong and very lasting. So I hope that you are warm where you are in Israel, because here it's quite cold. Stay the Israel. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Michael. And now we'll hear from Ben, his perspective.
Okay. I have to admit I'm a little nervous. Usually I speak to birthright students, and they've been traveling